Hello, and welcome to a Cloud Developer channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build a console application that gives you the ability to parse arguments. Now, in the past, I've had to build many applications that allow me to execute some piece of functionality. And one of the challenges that you always run into is how do you take in specific input from the user and be able to leverage that input in the business logic of your application itself. Now, I'll show you an easy way of how to accomplish something like that. So the first thing we're going to do is, as you can see, I have Visual Studio Community Edition open. And then we're going to go ahead and create a new project that's a console application. And from here, we're going to actually build a .NET Core application, because what that's going to allow us to do is actually create a cross-platform application that can be executed in Linux as well as Windows. Now, you're going to have to actually compile it on their respective operating systems, but the actual code and the actual solution itself can be completely reused without any changes. So I'll go ahead and call this console args, press enter. And one other important thing is, for this solution to work, you have to make sure you have .NET Core 2.x installed, because the functionality that the class that I'm going to be using here relies on it to be .NET Core application, specifically version 2 and higher. So in here, what you can see is once you have the actual project created, if you go to right-click in Properties on the project, the target framework that it chose by default is the highest version that I have, which is .NET Core 2, and there is also .NET Core 1 and 1.1. So we'll just keep it at that 2, and go ahead and close this. And from here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and find that class that I typically like to use, and it's actually called NDesk Options. You'll be taken to results, and here you'll see there's ndesk.org options. We'll click on that. And now this class and this library has been available for quite a while. It seems to be working pretty well so far. There are different variations of this floating around the internet, but I like to use the one that was originally created. So I'll go ahead and download the zip file. I'll open that up, and inside of this zip file there is the package. Actually, it's NDesk Options, and in this folder they have the DLL itself. Now, if you want to just use that DLL, you can, but you can't do it for .NET Core. This is actually compiled for a standard .NET framework. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open this class file up, and I'll just copy the content, and I'll just go ahead and right-click and add class, call it options. Once it comes up, I'll just override the entire file content, and I'll go ahead and close it. So that's pretty much how simple it is to get this functionality added. Now we need to actually build the framework for how do we actually parse this information. So I have an example already created here, but I'll actually walk you through some basics that you need to be aware of. So the first thing you need to be aware of, because the entry point to this application is actually a static method, you need to make sure that the arguments that we're going to be populating are actually static as well. Otherwise, you won't be able to actually reference them and set them. Now, there's ways around it differently. You can actually instantiate another class instance and actually pass the arguments, but what I'm going to show you is the simplest way that I found so far. So what we're going to start with is we're going to create a static variable that's called username. And this is going to actually contain our username that the user is going to provide. Then we're going to create a static boolean for showing computer name, and then static boolean for showing IP information. We're going to create a static boolean for showing operating system, so show OS. We're going to create a couple more static boolean for showing debug. Another one for showing help. So this is actually going to be enough for us to be able to show you the basics of this library. So the next thing you want to do is inside of your main class, you're going to want to declare a variable that's going to hold all the parsing logic for the arguments. And it's pretty simple. So we'll just call it var options. And we'll instantiate a class called option set. So in here, it's saying that it can't recognize it because we need to import a namespace. And then we'll go ahead and initialize it. And the way you use it is you basically declare all of the values inside of the curly braces here. So these are going to represent the specific arguments that we're going to be asking the user for. So in this particular case, the first value that we're going to provide is actually going to be the argument that we want the user to provide. So in this case, it will be you. This is going to be a shorthand for specifying the username. And then what this library allows you to do is give you the full variable name or the argument name. So in this case, we'll just say username. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to specify an equal sign. And this actually means something in this library. Basically, what this means is a user is expected to provide a value to it. This is not a Boolean flag. This is actually something that we expect the user to provide a value for so we can use it. Then we'll type in a comma, and in here we're going to provide the actual description that we want this particular argument to be able to have when we display the help menu. So here we're going to say provide the name of the user that is executing this application. Okay. And then here we're going to actually specify the logic in order to parse or how to deal with this argument. So we're using a lambda expression here, and this arg variable is actually going to be the representation of the argument that was being passed in. And then here what we're going to do is we're going to say set the username variable that we declared before to the actual argument that is being passed in. Now, that's basically the basic way for you to add that argument. We're going to copy and paste that, and we're going to adjust this slightly here. So here we're going to do the second argument, and that's going to be for the operating system. And this is a Boolean, so actually let's do a computer name. So, and in here we're going to say display the computer name. Now the difference here is we're actually going to set this variable based on the existence of the argument being specified. So basically all we care about is that somebody actually provided a flag saying, yes, I want to display the computer name. And the easiest way to do it is we're going to set the computer name variable, and it's going to be based on the fact that the argument is not null. So since we have that now, we can actually go ahead and copy and paste it a few more times for all the different booleans that we have. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more booleans. 2, let's see, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we'll delete the last comma. So here we're gonna provide the ability for displaying the operating system. So I'll just change this to display the OS version details. Then the next one, we're going to display the IP. And here we're going to do the debug. And the last one is going to be something to display help. So now you could also define multiple ways or shorthands as well. So in this case, the typical pattern is -h or /?, or just help. So all of these values are going to be valid for this particular argument parsing. So we'll be able to actually use it and follow the typical naming standards that people have. So, and then the description we're going to actually provide for the help is display the help information. Okay, so the debug is display any debugging information for this application. So display the IP address information for this computer. And then the other one is good. So now the only thing we have to do is just make sure that we set the right variables here. So show OS, and then we're going to do show IP, show debug, and then show help. Okay, so now since we finished declaring this options variable, the next step is for us to actually start using it. So and the way you start actually using it is you have to actually parse out the arguments, and you send the arguments to the options variable class instance, and then it actually allows you to execute this logic that we just defined. So the way you do that is by saying options parse, and then you feed it arguments. Now another thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to expect a result from this, and this is going to be populated inside of the extras variable. And basically what this will do is any arguments that are not parsed will actually be returned as an extra, and we can use that to display inside of the actual debugging logic that we are going to be building later. So this is all we needed to do in order to parse the arguments. Now the next step is for us to actually obtain the username. So in this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to say if the username is null or empty, then basically what we're going to do is we're going to set it to something, just so we don't have a blank username showing up. So, and we'll just default it to guest user, and then we're going to say console right line welcome user, and then tab, and we're going to be using the newer C# syntax here, and we're going to display the username. Close that. So the next step is going to be to actually display the help information. So just imagine a scenario where the user didn't provide you any arguments, any input whatsoever, or they might have provided something that just doesn't make sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if, and if the user is not asking for any help, and there's no arguments. Now, one thing you'll notice, I'm using this any syntax, and by default, you don't actually have a link namespace imported. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and import any, or the actual link namespace to give me this any argument, or the method call, extension method. And this will allow me to actually just validate if there's no items inside of the args array. And so basically, if there's no trigger for showing help or no arguments, we're going to want to actually display the help menu. So, but there's also another condition that we're going to want to meet, and that is going to be if there's any extras and we're not asked to display any debug information, then we'll also want to display this. So here what we're going to do is we're going to say show help equals to true. So then what we're going to do is we're going to actually check to see if show help is enabled, and we're going to display the help information, and we're also going to return out of this application, because if somebody actually wants to see help, most likely they're checking for something. So even if they provided some arguments, you don't want to continue executing the application. Also, if the user didn't provide any arguments, or maybe they want to actually see the debug information, or don't want to see the debug information in this particular case, then we're not going to want to trigger this logic. So what we're going to do here is, since we're saying go ahead and show help, we're going to use the built-in feature of the option class, which is options, and then write option descriptions, and basically that's going to show us the help menu, and we're going to want to actually write it out. Now it actually accepts a text writer, and luckily the console class actually has an out variable, and this is the actual console output that you can write to, so you can feed it directly into this method, and it will actually write directly to the console. And since we're doing a return, it will basically skip the rest of the application and just show you the help menu. So the next step we're going to take is we're going to start using or acting upon the arguments that the user provided. So we're going to check to see if the user wants to display the computer name, the operating system information, IP address, and any debugging information. So if the user wanted to see the computer name, now what we're going to do is console, right line, and then we're going to say computer name, tab, and then environment, machine name. If the user wanted to show the operating system, then we're going to write to the console. That's going to be OS version. And that's just going to be the OS version property of the environment. And then the next one is a little bit more complicated. And this is where we're going to actually be showing the IP information. So if the user wants to see IP information, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste it so you don't have to watch me actually type this all out, but I'll quickly explain what it's doing. So basically, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the namespace that is required for this. This is going to be the system.net.network information, and there's a class that has a static method that allows you to obtain all network interface information. Then we have a where clause. Basically what we're doing here is we're saying get me all of the network adapters on your computer, and then only filter for the ones, or search for the ones that are either wireless or Ethernet type. So basically that's your normal network connection that you plugged into. Then we're going to do a .toList, and this is so we can use this .forEach method. And in there we're going to basically expect the each iteration to give us an actual item that we're going to be iterating against. And this, in this case, NI stands for network interface. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get the network interface name and store it in the name variable. And then we're going to obtain a list of IP addresses. So let me format this a little bit better so we can see it. And I'll show you, I'll explain to you what it is actually doing. So basically what we're doing here is we're saying go get me the properties for that interface, then get me the unicast addresses property, where the address family is actually in a network, and then it's doing a selection into a different variable, and it's grabbing all of the IP addresses and returning them as a string. So basically we're going to get all of the IPs in a list way. So then at the end what we're going to do is we're going to call console right line, and we're going to display the name. And actually in here, I should be able to just use the name variable that we populated. And then we're going to display concatenated list of IPs, and the concatenation is using comma for separation. And all of this is contained inside of this kind of categorization way. So basically we're just going to separate it out from the rest of the content so it's a little bit easier to see to the user. And then we're going to go ahead at the end, we're going to close it out so we know where the next section of the information is going to come from. And we're done with showing IP information. Now the last portion is for us to actually display any debug information. So if show debug, and again I'll just copy and paste this and explain real quick. And what this is doing basically is it's checking to see do we have any extra. And if we do, and this is done so that we actually don't have a null reference exception in case there's no extras. And again, we're going to create kind of a categorization or a special section so we can, in case the user provided a lot of different arguments. And then we're going to go through each extra, and we're going to just dump it out to the console to show the user what extra arguments they passed in that the application couldn't parse. Now, if there are no extras, then what we're going to do is we're going to just display that there's no debug information available. So that's pretty much all you needed to do in order to make this actually work. So let's put in a breakpoint right here, and let's run this application and see how it works. So as soon as it started up, we'll see that the arguments are actually empty. There's nothing in here, and the console application doesn't display anything. Now, if we actually go ahead and parse this out by, I'm just pressing F10 to go to the next line, we'll see that the username was not provided, and so it's going to default it to guest user. And the next step is it's going to actually write that line out. So welcome user, and then whatever the username that we had. So in this case, it's guest user. And then the next step is, since no arguments have been provided and there's no show help, then this triggered this particular scenario. So it's going to say, make sure that help is shown to the user. And then the next processing is going to happen to actually write the actual description information, the help menu, and is going to return out of the rest of the application. And we'll see here that this is what actually got displayed to the user. So you'll see that actually formatted it very nicely. You can see the actual shorthand values as well as the full argument names, and then the description information being written out in a easy to understand way, and something that people are typically familiar with. So we'll go ahead and exit this out. Actually, I pressed F10 once too many times. So this is how you actually can validate your application. Now, what if you wanted to actually provide a username, and the way to debug this, you can actually right-click, go to Properties, go to Debug tab here, and then here you can actually provide the arguments for your application, so you can see how the application is going to behave. So in this case, I'll do -u, and then I'll provide the username that I want to have. So I'll go ahead and run this again, and let's see what it does now. So I'm going to go through this console, and you can see that now it actually says welcome user, and then it actually provided the value that I specified in the debugging section. And since we actually did have arguments, it actually skipped this show help logic, and then it went off and actually checked the arguments to see if we want to show any other information, and we don't, and the application finished. Now, this is how you do it through Visual Studio. Let's take a look one last thing, and that is, how do you actually run this application from the actual console? So I'll go ahead and go to the bin debug folder, and then here you'll see that typically in .NET applications in Windows, you would have an executable file. Now this is a .NET Core application, and it's made to run cross-platform, so it actually generates a DLL. And then what we're going to want to do is we want to execute it by using .NET space, and then provide the actual DLL name. And this will behave basically the same way as your executable application. Now, you can actually do a self-contained application. The problem with that would be is that it's going to actually try to compile and include all of the .NET Core DLLs as well, which is going to basically make your entire application very, very large. So this would be the most optimal way to actually deploy your application. Just basically tell your users that they have to install the .NET runtime on their machine, and then you just give them a small DLL like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and open up the command prompt in here, and then I'll just execute .NET, and then console args. And here, if I press enter, you'll see the same behavior. We're seeing the guest user, and then the help menu. So if I specify developer, we can see that the developer information showed up. You can also do equals. That also works, but you don't have to. I think this is nicer without the equal sign. And then the other thing we can do is actually specify C, O, I, and D. And if we provide all this information for these arguments, it actually triggered the different sections of our application to display the computer name, the actual operating system information. You can see the IP address, and there's no debug details. Now, if we actually specify some other arguments, you'll see that the extra parameters actually got provided in the extra parameter section. Now, another neat thing about this particular library is that you don't actually have to do dashes for all the different arguments. So if you wanted to do -C, O, I, D, and press enter, it actually understands and parses that as well and does it correctly for you. You didn't have to write a single line of code to actually do that extra parsing yourself either. And you can actually do it in different order. You can actually include certain things and not include other things, and it will provide the information for you as well. So hopefully this was useful, and you can use this in building your simple applications that for example, if you build something that you constantly have to rerun, or you don't want your end users to have to worry about knowing how to do something and you want to automate it, this is a great way for you to be able to build those automation capabilities and just distribute them through your executables or DLLs, and also do it in such a way where it's actually cross-platform compatible. Because I was able to actually take the same code and compile it on an Ubuntu machine, and was able to actually execute the same exact logic inside of a Ubuntu machine to give me the same exact experience. So I think this is very useful. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave your comments in the comment section below, and I will talk to you next time.